Cyclone Harry just devastated Sicily, and right now, over 1,000 rescue operations are underway as the entire coastline disappears into the Mediterranean Sea. Picture this: 8-meter waves slamming into coastal towns. The seaside promenade in Santa Teresa de Riva collapsing entirely. Restaurants, shops, homes vanishing in minutes. Emergency teams launched 1,650 interventions in just 72 hours. Firefighters are working around the clock. Planes at Malta's airport were aborting landings in mid-approach because crosswinds were too dangerous to land. Ferry services shut down, leaving thousands stranded on islands with no way out. But here is what has scientists in absolute panic. The damage is already over 1 billion euros and still climbing. Sicily alone suffered 740 million euros in damages. And this is not just a freak storm. Climate data shows the Mediterranean is warming faster than anywhere else on Earth, turning it into a cyclone factory that is destroying infrastructure built for a climate that no longer exists. Are we watching Europe's coastline disappear forever? Or is Cyclone Harry just the beginning of a Mediterranean nightmare that no one is prepared for? January 18th at 6:47 in the morning, Central European Time. Italy's civil protection authorities issue red alerts across Sicily, Sardinia, and Calabria as cyclone. Harry intensifies into an aggressive low-pressure system barreling toward the Mediterranean coast. Within minutes, meteorological stations register wind speeds accelerating beyond normal winter storm parameters. The first emergency calls flood into regional operations centers before most residents finish their morning coffee. By 8:23 in the morning, Mazara del Vallo records the first catastrophic impact. Waves measuring 8 meters high slam into the coastal infrastructure with devastating force. Century-old seawalls designed for Mediterranean conditions buckle under the assault. Restaurants along the waterfront flood within minutes. Boats tear from their moorings and smash into harbor structures. Emergency responders scramble to evacuate businesses as water surges through ground floor windows. At 10:15 in the morning, Catania's harbor monitoring systems detect storm surges exceeding 5 meters. Port authorities immediately shut down all operations across Sicily's eastern coast. Ferry services carrying hundreds of passengers abort mid-journey and return to port. Cargo ships that handle millions of euros in daily Mediterranean trade sit anchored and helpless as the storm intensifies. The seaside promenade at Santa Teresa de Riva becomes Cyclone Harry's most visible victim at 12:40 in the afternoon. The iconic walkway where families strolled for generations collapses entirely into the Mediterranean. Restaurants vanish, shops disappear. Infrastructure that survived decades of weather erases in minutes. By 2:18 in the afternoon, Sardinia reports wind gusts reaching 130 kilometers per hour. Trees uproot across the island. Power lines snap. Emergency services activate full crisis response protocols. Nearly 360 rescue operations launch simultaneously across Sardinia's east and south regions. At 4:55 in the afternoon, regional authorities suspend all ferry services to Sardinia and smaller islands. Thousands of residents and tourists find themselves stranded with no evacuation routes available. Island communities that depend on maritime connections face complete isolation. As darkness falls across the Mediterranean, emergency operations centers brace for a night of crisis response, unlike anything in recent Italian history. The storm shows no signs of weakening. Italian emergency services mobilized the largest peacetime rescue operation in recent history as Cyclone Harry transforms 3 regions into simultaneous disaster zones. Within 72 hours, firefighters execute 1,650 interventions across Sicily, Sardinia, and Calabria. The numbers are staggering and unprecedented. Sicily's emergency services deploy teams for over 1,000 operations as coastal communities face complete infrastructure collapse. Firefighters work in shifts around the clock. No rest, no pause. The calls keep flooding in faster than teams can respond. Roads become rivers, and buildings flood to second-story windows. Families are trapped on rooftops as water rises in minutes. Sardinia reports 360 rescue operations concentrated in the eastern and southern regions, where storm surge hits hardest. Emergency teams navigate winds of 130 kilometers per hour to reach stranded residents. Boats capsized in harbors, and cars were submerged on coastal roads. Power lines sparking in floodwaters create deadly hazards that slow rescue operations. Calabria's emergency response teams face nearly 300 crises along the Ionian coast. The scale overwhelms regional resources immediately. Mutual aid requests activate neighboring provinces to send personnel and equipment. But weather conditions prevent many reinforcements from reaching the worst affected areas. Near Mount Etna, Italy's finance police receive an urgent distress call at 3:47 in the afternoon. A Swiss family attempting to traverse the mountain becomes trapped in a sudden snowstorm spawned by Cyclone Harry's chaotic weather patterns. Helicopter crews battle extreme conditions to extract the family before hypothermia sets in. The rescue succeeds, but barely. Italy's Coast Guard launches full emergency protocols, deploying over 100 naval, land, and air assets. More than 450 Coast Guard personnel work continuous rotations, coordinating maritime rescues and monitoring environmental threats. Helicopters survey coastlines, documenting damage and tracking pollution risks as fuel tanks rupture and debris washes into the Mediterranean. Communication systems strain under the emergency load. Multiple regions are competing for the same limited helicopter assets. With ferry services suspended, island communities face complete isolation. Supplies are running low, and medical emergencies that require mainland evacuation are becoming life-threatening crises. Malta International Airport becomes the epicenter of Cyclone Harry's isolation crisis, as gale force winds transform one of Europe's busiest island airports into a trap. Air traffic controllers watch helplessly as multiple inbound flights approach through conditions that exceed safe landing parameters. The crosswinds are too dangerous, and the visibility is too compromised. At 11:23 in the morning, Flight 1B3841 from Madrid aborts its landing attempt just seconds before touchdown. The aircraft pulls up sharply and diverts to Sicily. Passengers scream. Children cry. Within 2 hours, 5 more flights abort mid-approach. Aircraft that departed hours earlier with Malta as their destination now scramble to find alternative airports in Italy. Arrivals grind to a halt as the storm intensifies. Departures continue, but face extreme delays as ground crews battle wind gusts that make aircraft servicing nearly impossible. The terminal fills with stranded passengers. Hotels book to capacity. Thousands find themselves trapped on an island with no way out. Meanwhile, across Malta's coastline, massive waves crash over seawalls in Sliema with devastating force. Water surges through streets, flooding ground-floor apartments and businesses. Balconies facing the Mediterranean become cascading waterfalls as the sea invades urban spaces. The vulnerability of island nations becomes brutally clear. Malta operates one international airport. When weather shuts it down, the entire nation becomes isolated. Medical emergencies requiring mainland hospitals face impossible delays. Business operations dependent on air cargo collapse. Tourism evaporates as travelers cannot reach or leave the island. This is the geopolitical reality of climate extremes hitting small island states. A single storm can sever every vital connection to the outside world. The same crisis unfolds across Mediterranean islands. Sardinia's airports face similar disruptions. Smaller Italian islands that depend entirely on ferry services sit completely cut off. Supplies dwindle. Emergency medical evacuations become impossible. What Cyclone Harry exposes is a systemic vulnerability that climate change will exploit repeatedly. As storms intensify and Mediterranean weather patterns destabilize, Island communities face a future where isolation becomes routine rather than exceptional. The question is no longer if this will happen again, but how often. Climate scientists analyzing Cyclone Harry's intensity point to a disturbing equation that is transforming the Mediterranean into a storm factory. Warmer seas mean stronger cyclones. The physics is brutally simple and terrifying in its implications. Mediterranean sea surface temperatures have climbed 4 to 6 degrees Celsius above the 20th century average. That warming loads the atmosphere with moisture that creates unprecedented rainfall events. 300 millimeters of rain hammered Sicily and Sardinia in just 48 hours. Those amounts reflect atmospheric water vapor concentrations that exceed historical records. Warmer air holds exponentially more moisture, and when that moisture condenses over land, the result is catastrophic flooding that overwhelms infrastructure designed for climate conditions that no longer exist. European meteorological centers tracking Mediterranean weather patterns report alarming data. The enclosed sea is warming faster than the global average. Unlike Atlantic storm systems that dissipate over thousands of miles of open ocean, Mediterranean cyclones intensify in a confined space, with nowhere for energy to disperse. Scientists call these systems medicanes, Mediterranean hurricanes that exhibit tropical characteristics in a region historically protected from such extremes. The storm intensity correlation with sea temperature anomalies is undeniable. Climate models projected these conditions would not occur until 2040 or later. Cyclone Harry arrived 15 years ahead of schedule. Meteorologists at Italy's National Research Council compare current data to historical Mediterranean weather patterns. The frequency and intensity of extreme cyclones have tripled since 2000. Infrastructure built to withstand 20th century storms cannot handle 21st century atmospheric conditions. Coastal defenses designed for wave heights of 3 to 4 meters face 8-meter surges that obliterate centuries-old construction in minutes. The future projections are even more alarming. Climate scientists warn that Mediterranean cyclone activity will continue intensifying as sea temperatures rise. What Europe experienced with Cyclone Harry represents the new baseline, not an anomaly. Each degree of warming exponentially increases storm potential energy. The scientific consensus is clear and terrifying. The Mediterranean is transforming from a relatively calm inland sea into a region where hurricane-force cyclones become routine events that European nations are utterly unprepared to handle. Marco Bellini watches his family restaurant disappear into the Mediterranean from a police barricade in Santa Teresa de Riva. 3 generations built that business. His grandfather opened the doors in 1952. His father expanded the dining room overlooking the promenade in 1978. Marco took over operations in 2003. Now it is gone. The entire seaside walkway collapses into churning waves as emergency responders pull him back from the edge. Everything he owns vanishes in minutes. In Mazzara del Valle, the Russo family evacuates their coastal home with nothing but emergency bags as 8-meter waves threaten to breach their neighborhood. Maria Russo is 67 years old and suffers a panic attack as firefighters carry her through knee-deep water. Her medication remains in the flooded house. The family sleeps on cots in a high school gymnasium converted to emergency shelter. Children crying. Elderly residents requiring medical attention overwhelm the volunteers who struggle to provide it. Near Mount Etna, the Swiss family of 4 that finance police rescued from the sudden snowstorm describes conditions that turned lethal in minutes. Thomas Weber and his wife attempted a winter hike with their teenage children when Cyclone Harry spawned blizzard conditions at 2,000 meters elevation. Visibility dropped to 0. Temperatures plummeted. The helicopter rescue crew arrived less than an hour before hypothermia would have killed them. Along Sicily's eastern coast, fishermen survey harbors filled with destroyed boats and shattered livelihoods. Giuseppe Marino, a third-generation fisherman, lost his trawler worth €180,000 when moorings failed during the storm surge. His father's boat. His livelihood. his family's future. Insurance covers a fraction of the loss. Port workers in Catania watch decades of infrastructure reduced to twisted metal and submerged equipment. Cranes toppled. Container handling systems flooded with seawater that will corrode electronics beyond repair. Tourism workers face economic devastation as hotel bookings evaporate and the 2025 season collapses before it begins. The €740 million in damage in Sicily alone represents thousands of individual catastrophes, families losing homes, businesses destroyed, communities that will take years to rebuild, if they rebuild at all. Regional officials across southern Italy compile damage assessments that reveal an economic earthquake spreading far beyond the immediate storm zone. The preliminary numbers are staggering and still climbing. Sicily's governor Renato Schifani reports losses exceeding €740 million, with the figure expected to surge once lost income calculations finalize. Sardinia's regional president warns damage could reach hundreds of millions more, as teams access areas still cut off by flooding. Calabria and Malta continue tallying costs that push the total crisis impact beyond €1 billion. Insurance industry executives hold emergency meetings as Mediterranean flood claims overwhelm regional market capacity. Many coastal businesses discover their policies exclude storm surge damage, leaving families financially devastated with no recovery pathway. Port closures across Sicily and Sardinia disrupt supply chains that feed all of Europe. Container ships carrying automotive parts, electronics, and agricultural products sit stranded in harbors. Manufacturing facilities in Germany and France report production delays as Mediterranean shipping grinds to a halt. The interconnected European economy reveals its vulnerability when a single storm shuts down critical maritime corridors. Tourism industry losses cascade across the region during what should be peak winter season bookings. Hotels cancel reservations, airlines divert flights, cruise ships bypass Italian ports. The economic damage extends months beyond the actual storm, as reputation destruction keeps visitors away. Regional government budgets face an immediate crisis, as emergency spending depletes reserves meant to last entire fiscal years. Sicily's administration requests emergency EU disaster relief funding. Sardinia applies for infrastructure reconstruction grants. The European Union Solidarity Fund activates, but bureaucratic timelines measure in months, while communities need help immediately. Political pressure intensifies around climate adaptation funding that national governments previously considered too expensive. The brutal calculus becomes undeniable. Invest billions in coastal defenses and upgraded infrastructure, or spend exponentially more on repeated disaster response. Cross-border coordination challenges expose systemic weaknesses in European emergency management. Different nations operate under separate protocols. Communication systems do not integrate seamlessly. Resource-sharing agreements collapse under actual crisis conditions. The geopolitical dimension of climate extremes, straining European unity, becomes impossible to ignore. What threatens Italy today threatens Spain, France, and Greece tomorrow. January 22nd. Italian authorities officially lift red alert warnings across Sicily, Sardinia, and Calabria as Cyclone Harry moves east into the Adriatic. But the crisis is far from over. Emergency services remain on high alert as structural engineers assess coastal infrastructure damage that could claim more lives through delayed collapses. Entire neighborhoods remain evacuated as officials determine which buildings can be safely occupied. The assessment timelines stretch into weeks. Rebuilding timelines measure in years, not months. Infrastructure engineers surveying Santa Teresa de Riva's collapsed promenade face a brutal question. Do they rebuild what existed, or design for a future that will be worse? Every coastal structure destroyed by Cyclone Harry must be reconstructed to withstand storm conditions that are intensifying with each passing year. The engineering challenge is unprecedented. Historical context makes the acceleration undeniable. The Mediterranean has experienced major storms throughout recorded history, from the 1966 Florence floods to the 2018 Medicane that hit Greece. But those disasters unfolded over weeks, with warning periods that allowed preparation. Cyclone Harry compressed catastrophic impacts into 72 hours, with intensity that exceeded every historical precedent. Climate models projected these storm conditions would not manifest until 2040 or later. The timeline accelerated by 15 years. Other Mediterranean nations watch Sicily's devastation with alarm. Spain's meteorological service upgrades coastal monitoring systems. France accelerates seawall reinforcement programs along the Mediterranean coast. Greece convenes emergency planning sessions for island evacuation protocols. Regional governments across southern Europe recognize that what hit Italy represents their future. European Union officials discuss comprehensive early warning system upgrades and cross-border emergency response coordination that actually functions under crisis conditions. The policy shift from reactive disaster response to preventative infrastructure adaptation gains momentum as the economic reality becomes impossible to ignore. Spending billions on adaptation costs less than spending trillions on repeated catastrophes. Climate scientists analyzing Cyclone Harry data reach a disturbing consensus. This storm represents the new baseline, not an exceptional event. Mediterranean cyclone intensity will continue escalating as sea temperatures rise. What devastated Sicily might appear mild compared to systems forming a decade from now? The question facing Europe is no longer whether to adapt, but whether adaptation can happen fast enough. Cyclone Harry has passed. The Mediterranean returns to its deceptive calm, but nothing will ever be the same along the coasts of Sicily, Sardinia, and Calabria. The empty spaces where promenades once stood tell a story that extends far beyond €1 billion in immediate damage. This is about what comes next. Marco Bellini's restaurant will not reopen. The Russo family cannot afford to rebuild their flooded home. Giuseppe Marino's fishing business collapsed with his destroyed trawler. These are not statistics. These are lives shattered by a climate system that is reorganizing itself faster than European nations can respond. The communities along Sicily's eastern coast face a brutal choice: rebuild in the same locations and wait for the next Cyclone Harry to destroy everything again, or abandon centuries of coastal heritage and retreat inland. Neither option is acceptable. Both are inevitable. The questions facing Europe have evolved beyond whether the Mediterranean climate is changing. Scientists confirmed that years ago. Now the questions cut deeper and more urgent. Can infrastructure adaptation happen fast enough to prevent catastrophic losses with each new storm? Will cross-border emergency coordination improve before the next crisis exposes the same fatal weaknesses? How many more billion-euro disasters must devastate southern Europe before prevention becomes the priority instead of reaction? The Mediterranean is transforming from vacation paradise to a climate frontline. What happened in Sicily during those 72 hours in January represents a warning that every coastal nation from Spain to Greece must heed. Storm intensity will continue escalating. Sea temperatures will keep rising. Cyclone frequency will increase. The baseline keeps shifting upward toward conditions that make current infrastructure obsolete before construction crews finish building it. International climate research centers analyzing Cyclone Harry data reach conclusions that should terrify European policymakers. The atmospheric and oceanic conditions that created this storm are accelerating beyond worst-case projections. Events forecast for mid-century are manifesting decades early. The timeline for adaptation is compressing while the scale of required investment expands exponentially. Europe stands at a critical juncture. Invest unprecedented resources in coastal defense systems, early warning networks, emergency response coordination, and climate-resilient infrastructure. Or accept that cyclones like Harry will repeatedly devastate Mediterranean nations, with escalating human and economic costs that eventually become unsustainable. The choice seems obvious, but political will remains the missing variable in an equation where physics and economics have already provided the answer. The waves have receded from Santa Teresa de Riva. The empty promenade stretches along the coast like an open wound. More will disappear. The only question is how many and how soon.